bass in that way is pioneered by reggae sound system. Even our cells have these sort of hair-like structures on them that respond to vibratory stimulus. So our entire body is actually a listening device. The way the sound system manifested was actually a sort of urban contemporary manifestation of something way more ancient. Who is this being that is being revered in this space? This is something holy. This is something sacred.
Kibir La Amlak, welcome to the Mind Forest podcast.
Wow, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. It's been a little while back and forth, but I'm really happy to have you in the studio today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. Give thanks.
Excellent.
Give thanks.
Excellent. We're going to dive into a lot today. You're very well known in the reggae sound system scene for lots of different things for your work, and you and I have been having some really interesting chats around music, mental health, the kind of ritual of dance, and many other things. So, yeah, we'll be deep diving today. But just to kick things off, it would be good to know a little bit about around your story. So, could you tell me, when were you first introduced to sound system culture? When did you first fall in love and with the culture? And just tell me a little bit about your early stages in the journey.
Yeah, there's a few things that like coalesced around the same time, and I don't remember the exact timeline, but they were all very close to each other. And there was the discovery of the music,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was I inherited from my father a double 15-inch bass box. And then there was my first Jashaka sound system experience.
Okay.
And all of that happened around between the age of 8 and 9. And although too young to fully understand what was important about the music, it was very evident to me from the parts of the lyrics that I could understand and form like a kind of contextual relationship with. Um, the feeling of the music, the way it was mixed, the way it sounded so dramatically different from anything that I had heard on the radio up until that point. And then hearing that through Jashaka sound system. And it so happens that the first record that made me kind of sit down and really think, what is this music, was a Jashaka album with Max Romeo, Far Eyes, the captain of my ship. And then, yeah, hearing that through the Shaka sound system in St. Paul's in Bristol at the St. Paul's Carnival, it just set something in my mind that became like a lifelong kind of love, fascination, um, relentless kind of uh, place for inquiry and understanding and challenge and growth. And it, the reggae sound system is a whole ecosystem, and if engaged within its fullness, it really, there's a lot within that.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
100%. For someone from the outside who might not have experienced sound system culture, what are some of the elements to that ecosystem?
When you talk about reggae sound system, you're talking about a way of engaging with recorded music that is relatively, well, especially in its inception, is unheard of, and a practice that totally differs from all of the other ways music that people have engaged with recorded music, also, and the way that music is amplified.
Mm-hmm.
So, to try and explain that, if you have a stage show, you have a band on a stage, they have some stage monitors, Then you have some speakers that are in front of all of the microphones to prevent feedback loops, which is the speakers that the audience are receiving the music from, which is mixed by a sound engineer. And then in a kind of nightclub or disco kind of environment, you've got a DJ booth with some DJ monitors, and then you've got the club PA and so forth. Whereas reggae sound system now, it removes that sonic disconnect between the people that are in charge of the music and the people that are receiving the music. Because I mean, it's a culture that's been so visually appealing that almost every major brand has utilized it in its advertising year after year, season after season. I saw one of the main sports retailers recently in the UK has got all these sound system style looking boxes
Mhm.
as part of their display, and it happens over and over again. And I'm saying that because for the listeners that are not aware, it's almost impossible that the image of reggae sound system isn't imprinted in their mind somewhere, because it's so visually striking to see these oversized speaker cabinets, often fashioned by hand. So there's a sort of real kind of, you can see craftsmanship in them, set up in a big kind of like 360-degree surround, these towering stacks of speakers. Um, Often, at night, or, in a dark hall or something like that, quite dimly lit type of environment. And in amongst that 360 degrees
Mm.
will also be the people that are playing the music. The selector that's selecting the records, or the operator that's controlling the sound system, or the people that are controlling the microphone. So the reason that is, just from that perspective so different is like I say, because there's no disconnect. There's no stage monitor front of house PA. There's no DJ monitor booth club PA. Everyone is immersed in this sort of sonic landscape in a way that's much more reminiscent of something ceremonial or ritualistic, maybe using drums
Mm.
or chanting or something like that. And I mean, that kind of speaks to the context that it was born out of. We're talking Jamaica, like in the 50s, late 50s, and the places that people wanted to gather and the music that people wanted to listen to was countercultural to the mainstream.
Right.
So then it couldn't take place in a nightclub environment. Everything had to be fashioned, everything was DIY. It was kind of by the people for the people, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So that that was a culture that was kind of necessitated by the context. But the people that are necessitating that culture and the context that they're in is a dispossessed people that have been, taken away from their natural indigenous languages, either via the transatlantic slave trade or via being dominated, at the arrival of the, so say, discoverers or colonizers, if you will. And stripped of cultural practice, ceremonial practice, and new cultural practices and new things imposed upon them. So, whilst it's possible that you can do this to a degree intellectually, you can't strip the kind of genetic and transpersonal memories and the access to the ancestral realms and those things. So it's possible to have a generation of people that are intellectually stripped of culture, of their kind of the culture that follows their lineage and ancestry, but it's always going to be present somewhere. So this is a kind of long way of saying that it seems kind of self-evident to me that the way the sound system manifested was actually a sort of urban contemporary manifestation of something way more ancient, um, something which seems to be inherently ceremonial, inherently ritualistic,
Mm.
and it doesn't take much imagination to see the parallels between the original indigenous cultural practices and the manifestation of something which is essentially the same thing, but utilizing technology.
There's often a, like you say, a ritualistic undertone, a ceremonial undertone, the
Mm.
sense that you're at something more than a music event. And what you described there brings a lot of context to that. You've used the word ritual quite a few times there. Ritual, something I'm really interested in myself. I feel that in the Western world, especially, we've been stripped of many of our rituals, and I think they're very key to human, if not happiness, at least it's a key form of behavior that we've engaged in. Obviously, we will always find rituals, whether that's through religion or media or friendship groups or whatever it might be. But yeah, what does ritual mean to you, and how does it apply in the context of a sound system night?
I think it can happen anywhere, anytime. Just listening to music whatsoever is a form of ritual, in my opinion. Um, but the thing that will really distinguish something being sort of coincidentally ritualistic, or, you know, intentionally ritualistic is the intention. And if you can kind of, some of these, if we just think about the sound system boxes, it was customary that they would have, Stars of David, Lion of Judah, Jah Rastafari, the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, painted over them, adorned with this beautiful imagery and sacred word, sound, and power. Then the control tower, which would be where, the turntable and the controls for the sound system equipment, similarly would frequently be adorned with imagery and words and symbols. Around the control tower, banners of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie and, other kind of prophets, Marcus Garvey, the flag of the Lion of Judah, Empress Menen, sort of, you know, creating this kind of like sacred tabernacle kind of, like the Holy of the Holies kind of space within the gathering.
Yeah, I've noticed frankincense being burned as well and things like that, which is
Standard practice.
quite reminiscent. Being raised Catholic from a whole nother world,
Okay.
but still the same, some of the same roots in a way. That was always something I noticed as soon as I walked in. That's
Yeah.
frankincense burning, that
Some
biblical kind of sense.
Yeah, and these smells and scents and aromas, they're not just sacred because someone said they are.
Mm.
They're sacred in origin, but it's become an indelible print in almost everyone's kind of mind. And then it's part of the collective unconscious that when you smell it, you understand this is something holy.
Mm.
This is something sacred. I'm sure there's even, something in the vibrational relationship between however the, scent and however it interacts with whatever it does in your nose to conjure up the experience of smell in your head. I'm sure there's a sacred vibration in those particular smells, because it's, unless you've had some sort of terrible experience in church, which many people have.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
but for the most part, when you smell frankincense, you just know it's
Hmm.
holy. Everyone knows it's holy.
Hmm.
Um, and then obviously it's not so feasible nowadays in today's climate, but traditionally it's going to be the smell of incense mixed with the smell of ganja, because ganja was consumed, en masse as a kind of burnt offering and as the gateway for sacred experience inside that sound system context.
Mm.
So a lot those components combined with the fact that the music is also generally going to be of a Rastafari orientation. Not exclusively, because the unique thing is that there's a kind of um, political and social component to it as well. But within that framework, there's a lot of sacred music being played. And I don't see any way else to describe that other than ceremony and ritualistic. It's not a night out, it's not a party, it's not a disco, it's hundreds of thousands of millions of people can attest to that. That when they step into that gathering, it's something to behold.
You said in one of your talks, sound system culture saved your life. How did it save your life?
Because of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, there's because you're dealing with a music now that has a moral and ethical framework, and it's a music that lyrical framework is a byproduct of Rastafari.
Mm-hmm.
So, Haile Selassie is the ultimate embodiment of morality. And when you have at the pinnacle the ultimate embodiment of morality, and then you have an art form that develops around that as a mode of cultural expression for those inside the faith. And that art form is also an art form that utilizes social commentary and political discourse as well, and insists upon the listener to be the best version of themselves at all times, because everyone has to aspire to walk and emulate and hold themselves accountable to the example of His Imperial Majesty. So to have a music now so it forms part of your everyday something,
Yeah.
You wake up, you're listening to that music, you do this, you do that. For me, I'm walking to school, I've got my headphones on, I'm listening to the music. I'm doing that trick where you put one earphone up your sleeve and keep the earphone in the palm of your hand, so I can be listening to sound system cassettes while I'm in school. We go to the sound system sessions, we record them on cassette tape in there, take them, listen to them like chapter after chapter after chapter. But it's also a music business context. So you've got record stores now, and you go to the record stores and you buy the music, and then you engage in a lot of discussion and things around the music. And when you go to these sound system sessions, there's book stands, and you can buy some books and learn about these really important things in history that you didn't ever get taught in school. And then there's food, selling, Ato, vegan food and this and some juices and things like that.
Yeah.
So it offered, for me personally, it offered such a profound and beautiful and really needed contrast to the mainstream. Because you've got the mainstream here, which is preaching these sort of, values of separatism and individualism and kind of like greed, and it
Yeah.
snowballs.
Yeah. When I first discovered sort of sound system nights, again, not being someone who's part of the scene, but from the outside, sort of coming in, I was like, wow, so there's a way to enjoy myself that doesn't involve hedonism, doesn't involve alcohol necessarily, which
Hmm.
is, not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just nice that it seems to be one of the only alternatives that still allows for the gathering, the music, the vibrations, the night culture that isn't so reliant on, unfortunately, what seems to be the predominant kind of night out in the UK anyway, is involving drink, drugs, debauchery, potentially unsafe situations. And I've always been struck by how inclusive these dances are, because obviously you've mentioned that it's an explicitly political and cultural scene that has developed from from a very particular part of the world that obviously has taken on a UK flavour. But even within that, it seems to be a very inclusive scene where anyone can come and enjoy themselves and partake in the music.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is very noteworthy because,
Yeah,
I mean, inclusivity is this kind of buzzword of the now. It's everyone is concerned with inclusivity. Um, but the sound system world, I think, was the epitome of inclusivity. And see, there's nothing wrong with hedonism. There's nothing wrong with drinking, taking drugs, unless, until something's wrong with it. So many people have the privilege in life of being able to don't have too much traumas, they don't have too much, you know, dangerous home environments. So going out week after week and drinking and taking drugs, it might not be, amazing for their kidneys and livers, but they're young, they'll bounce back. And it's of no major detriment to their lives. They probably also, you know, do it in a context where they're unlikely to incur criminal charges and so forth.
sure.
But that's not true for everyone. And, the problem with alcohol and drugs and hedonism and things is when it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong. So that's why it's very important that there's places that offer an alternative. And that's one of the reasons that I would say personally it was something that I can say without a shadow of a doubt saved my life,
Mm,
because I desperately needed an alternative. It wasn't going to work for me trying to you know have my recreational activities in you know wrecking creation. In It was going to wreck me as one of God's creations. It was going to wreck me to be recreational,
yeah,
because I had been through a sufficient amount of things in my life where it would be very dangerous for me to be intoxicated in a dangerous environment. Nonetheless, it was something that I had already started doing as a young man because that's the social norm.
that's what you do. You finish school, you go out with your friends. What's the main thing everyone does? They go to the pub, they go out drinking. Alcohol is the predominant form of intoxication in our society,
Yeah.
smoking cigarettes. And it's just, I think I can relate so much to what you're saying in terms of just to have an alternative to say, oh, I can have a night out where I'm sober, I'm not wrecked, where I'm in the company. You made a powerful point earlier. There could be a 70-year-old at the dance and a
Hmm.
7-year-old. I think that's a sign of a really healthy environment.
This is why I would say it's the epitome of inclusivity.
Sure.
So I walked into the I experienced sound system, like I say, when I was about 9,
Uh-huh.
8 or 9.
Wow, that's young. Yeah.
It formed this lifelong love where I then also inherited a piece of a sound system at that time. So,
Okay.
and I started buying records. But, you know, still, like I say, when I was in my teenage years, I would try and go to the bar, drink some drinks, and do this. And then at a certain point, when I really realized, and I really went into a sound system session, and then I was like, I don't, there's no social obligation for me to drink. And actually, I was always someone who loved ganja.
Right.
So I'm like, and I can smoke here. But nonetheless, what I want to make clear is there was still alcohol on sale.
Hmm.
You could still buy a Red Stripe, you could still buy a Guinness, you could still buy a rum. And many would be sipping on a Guinness or something. But what I never saw was people completely beside themselves, you know, totally intoxicated,
Yeah.
unaware of their surroundings, unable to conduct themselves in a polite manner. And when it would so often be the case that when people tried to go to that place, they would pass out. I've seen people pass out in sound system sessions plenty of times because the environment just doesn't lend itself to that, or at least in those times didn't lend itself to that,
Yeah.
because you've got a dark room, it's thick with ganja smoke. So even if you're not a smoker, you're passively smoking.
Right.
For anyone that's never experienced it, that might be listening or watching this, it's very hard to understand how much bass is in a sound system
I was
session.
about to say that people, if you haven't been to a sound system, especially like Kabir's explaining when the speakers are turned inwards, it's more of a physical than a sonic experience. That the amount, the power in the bass is crazy. I mean, I can't, when I've been, I can't necessarily get too close
No,
to the speakers, but we can over intellectualize talking about it. But yeah, I just second what you're saying. The real physical vibration of the speakers is unlike anything you'll experience at any kind of other music night.
I think if you've never experienced it, the only thing I could compare it to is if you've got a wonky washing machine and when it goes into spin dry, and if you were to lean against it with your back,
Yeah.
that's kind of, if you could imagine that in a very pleasurable and rhythmic and warm sense,
Mm.
that's the potency of the bass.
Yeah, yeah, and it's medicinal, right? This touches on the healing aspects of the ritual. It's not just about gathering. It's not just about religion. You know, there's been times I've seen other people just have really transformative or stress relieving experiences being in that sonic environment.
Yeah, because, you know, the bass, I mean, let's also just be clear, bass in that way is pioneered by reggae sound system.
Right.
Like, I would argue that the world didn't even have bass until the reggae sound system came.
Mm.
The construction of these enormous cabinets for the speakers in Jamaica, in my hypothesis is that it was, so you had like people like Count Ozzy in the hills recording the Nyabingi drum, but the technology to reproduce those bass tones wasn't really there. There was amplifiers and there were speakers, and then they were put into enormous cabinets to increase the low frequency response. And then it was a Jamaican engineer who was a pilot for the British Royal Air Force that went back to Jamaica after the war, and he actually invented the first division of high and low frequencies, the first technology to divide high and low frequencies. Which again, if you understand anything about the kind of the physics of reproducing sound, you know, it's in that splitting of the frequencies that allows you to extend the low frequency
Okay.
without crushing the high frequency. And so I think, you're talking about a people that's still within close memory of ceremonial, ritualistic gatherings that involve drums with tone and weight and bass. That's constellating itself into the manipulation of the technology that's being used to construct the sound systems to recreate this experience. Because bass is it is as much, like you say, a sonic experience as it is a physical vibratory experience.
Yeah.
And the jury's kind of out now, because the science is backing up what all of the ancient ways of thinking about sound and vibration have known for millennia. And these notions now of sort of brain entrainment and things like that are revealing that our relationship to the kind of vibratory world is it's more than just healing. There's this common like Newtonian Western secular thinking that the boundary of us as individuals starts and ends with our skin. Our skin encapsulates our tissues and organs and bones and blood, and that is our boundary to the outside world and the outside world's boundary to us.
Sure.
But the world of sound or vibration really puts into context that that's not true. Not only is the skin fractal and porous anyway, so there is no real, the more you zoom in, you see there isn't an actual boundary. It's just a concentration of cells on this outer layer, which is completely porous. But even our cells have these sort of hair-like structures on them that respond to vibratory stimulus. So our entire body is actually a listening device for picking up subtle and gross vibrations from the outside world and from the inner world and from each other.
Yeah.
And so taking music now, recorded music especially, and really exaggerating those low frequencies and making it a kind of tactile experience that's permeating every cell in your body, but doing that in this kind of shape that we've gathered in for how many millions of years, and doing that collectively. There's the notion of individuality starts to fade quite quickly. Like when there's a bass line rattling everything, but it's not rattling it like a machine gun rattling it or a washing machine.
Yeah.
It's rattling it with this beautiful rhythm. And it's like one of the common markers of health is good HRV, good heart rate variability, and that good heart rate variability is a nice, smooth oscillation, not some jagged.
Sure.
So, and a good baseline is a nice, smooth oscillation. So, being inside these nice, warm, smooth, rhythmic, and rhythmic being a key word here, because random low frequency sounds signals all the brain's protective circuitry.
Okay.
Because if there's a random sudden sound, you're hardwired to want to know what that sound is, where it come from,
Sure.
if you need to play dead or if you need to run for your life.
So it triggers like a stress response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But when it's rhythmic, I don't know, it's a different it triggers something transcendental, something you're aligning yourself with frequencies that, um, seem to underpin the very nature of being alive. Bass falls within the gamma, bass frequencies fall within the gamma brainwave frequencies. That there's a study of a field of medicine called vibroacoustic therapy, which kind of is premised on the notion that every cell has a resonant frequency.
Okay.
Or and every organ has a resonant frequency and so forth, and anything that is unhealthy is actually is in discord, so it's not in a harmonious accord with the other cells, and it can therefore be treated with sound to have its kind of vibrational frequency rectified, to either kill it because you're going to kind of phase it out of existence, or bring it back into the right frequency so that it can have a correct expression.
Makes sense. And when you're speaking around the sort of healing, the transformative, even transcendental nature of the music you're immersed in, it's also got me thinking how careful we have to be with our own psyche and what we absorb, because obviously everything exists in polarity. So if there are frequencies which can give us healing and beneficial effects, there will also be those which, as you mentioned, can cause stress response and discord. And it's just a reflection, really. But we live in a society where we're just bombarded with so much media and information. And one thing I've been really conscious of recently is just trying to turn it all down, turn it off a bit more. I'm guilty of just always having something on, like a podcast, a radio, the TV. And it just struck me recently. I was like, wow, that's a lot for me to be taking in. And I don't know what impact that has on me. But certainly even advertising. I saw a stat that the average person hears over 100 adverts a day.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's
with
crazy.
YouTube and things now.
It seeps away into our society, and it's part of our society. So having a place where you can just go intentionally switch off and tune into something that is healing, which from whichever way you want to understand that is, can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, now more than ever. This is sort of irony. Is becoming increasingly hard for the sound system to function in an optimal way.
Yeah.
To have all of that, but arguably the need for that is really potent at the moment, because we are being bombarded. The like the sound of living in one of the major cities, like just our walk to get to the studio, it's just the sound of trucks and buses and sirens and helicopters and all of this, and trains. These do have a stress effect. It's people kind of, I'm not even going to say people because I include myself, but we live in a sort of collective amnesia and fantasy that this state of current affairs is anything other than brand new. I mean, it's literally brand new.
It's brand new.
It's literally only though you do not have to wind the clock back very far, where any one of the sounds that we get exposed to on a daily basis would have been a serious something. There's either a giant rock falling down somewhere, or there's an animal that you need to take care of, or there's a war or something. And now we're just taking all of this kind of aggressive, and I don't mean aggressive by the people, but aggressive like combustion engines. We just take that for granted. Then we're indoctrinated non-stop. If you've got a smartphone, if you go on social media, if you watch television, if you listen radio, if you live in a city and you travel on the underground and the bus, it's just what is now even flashing light, like flashing advertisements and things, and this constant battle for your attention, and the constant battle to get the most amount of information, or the strongest call to action condensed into the smallest piece of information and injected into you as quickly as possible. And the sound system now is the perfect antidote.
Antidote.
Obviously, there's a million antidotes,
Yeah,
any form of spiritual practice, martial art, all of these things, meditation practice, they're
yeah,
all um, um, very valid forms of antidote to that.
sure.
But I want to draw us back to the inclusivity frame question, because
Yeah,
what I think is so beautiful and worthy of, celebration and preservation in the sound system is that when engaged with in a relatively sober or completely sober frame of mind,
mm-hmm.
it requires of you a discipline. And that discipline means that you're going to have to forego your night's sleep. And when you forego your night's sleep without any form of stimulant, that can be a meditative practice. It's also not within, or the type of sound system session that I'm reminiscing on is not within a nightclub setting with licensed badge holding security guards who are totally disconnected from the music and the culture and the experience, doing bag searches, making you feel uncomfortable, asking you for photo ID,
Yeah.
and all of these
Man, I've got
things.
to be honest, like that whole, I understand the need for that, but I've come to a point now. I mean, I only will go out, quite rarely now, but when I do, that can almost just put you off for the whole night. If you go to an event and you've got to have your photo scanned, be searched, be kind of almost dehumanized by a kind of
Yeah,
security protocol, you just feel like you're a number, you're a cog in a wheel by the time you even get into an event.
yeah,
And that's just the way it is now.
yeah.
But there's a healthy respect at certainly the right kind of sound system dance, right? There's boundaries that have to be there. There's an inclusivity and openness, but also if someone is acting in a way which is antisocial, there's usually a kind of a collective kind of guarding of the space.
Well, yeah, we're in an order.
Yeah,
And that's when I think this notion of inclusivity really comes into its own, because all walks of life could go to the session.
100%.
And so, you're talking about, you'd have some real bad man in the session, but they know when they come to the session, this is a gathering of righteousness. So even what society would have depicted as, the lowest of the low, with violent impulses and bad behavior and so forth,
Sure.
would come in and know that they're stepping into something which has an order and a framework, and that this was the gathering where they must behave themselves. So that, I think, is inclusivity on a scale that's not paralleled now, because those people are not going to want to show photo ID. They're not going to want to have a bag search. Just as like a 70-year-old elder is not going to want to have their waistband patted down by a 25-year-old security guard that can't even do it necessarily with grace and respect.
Yeah.
Um, just as they're also not going to let someone who's got like a relatively mature looking 13-year-old son or something come in with him. That can't happen. It also used to be, that we would go to these sessions with like bags of juice and some snacks, maybe like even a little hot food, or something like a soup in a
Yeah, because
thermos.
it's a long experience. These aren't 2 or 3 hour things. These, for anyone who hasn't been, a sound system night is it's till dawn.
It's still done.
100%.
And that's part of
It's an endurance as much as anything else.
But that's what makes it ritualistic.
Yeah.
Because just like when you see in these kind of like Buddhist training camps for the
Yeah.
monks,
Uh-huh.
they sit and meditate, and if they start dozing off, they get a lick round the back with a stick.
Yeah.
And it's like they say, you know, you so many times you can feel like, oof, especially if you've been consuming ganja and you start to feel a bit heavy, and you plow through. You find the energy. Maybe you say a little prayer, and then a song that has profound meaning to you and probably everyone else in the space comes on. And then at 5:47 in the morning, when you just thought that your legs couldn't take no more,
Yeah.
all of a sudden there's this enormous catharsis, and everyone just frees up, and there's there's a movement in the place. Everyone's moving, yet everyone has space, no matter how busy it is.
Yeah.
This harmonious sense that everyone can move in one accord and is conscious of their surroundings, even though you're going to have people with one leg up in the air and this and some karate moves and so forth, but no one isn't getting kicked in the head because it's the energy has lifted collectively, because there isn't this sort of individualistic, I'm here to have my time and then I'm living my best life, and you know, it's not that at all. You're you're in this field of total sonic saturation, which is punctuated by extreme gaps in the music of sonic deprivation. Two sort of healing modalities, you know, people go and do all these gong baths and things to get an experience of being sonically saturated, and then people go into these, what do you call it, immersion tanks, where you go and lie in pitch blackness with no sound.
Yeah, I tried one of those last year actually. Yeah.
But you see, that's what's beautiful. It's all there in the sound system. And it's like, even from early disco days, you know, they didn't leave gaps. The DJ didn't leave no gaps. Whereas the sound system thing is a one turntable. Take the needle off. You might get sometimes like a minute, sometimes a minute and a half, even more silence. And to go from this sort of bass heavy thing into the silence again, you got to be able to, you've got to be in a state where your body can undergo that dramatic change. And if you're not in that state, if you're maybe drunk, it's too disorientating. The whole experience requires you to feel into yourself, feel into your surroundings, feel into the music, and it requires your undivided attention. And there's not, you know, I'm always speaking slightly from a sort of nostalgic perspective, because the ultimate, because I'm going to say that it happens in the dark, which doesn't happen that often anymore.
Yeah.
But to have that experience in the dark, we've got no laser beams, no strobe lights. There's no need for a smoke machine because you're burning herb. The visual senses, by very virtue of the sense of the visual, is an externalization. You can't engage with the visual without engaging with the external world, because everything that you render as part of your visual experience is outside of you. But that's not really true with the sonic, especially when it's vibratory and not just, or you know, not just the frequency band that only our ears experience, but the part that we can really tangibly feel in every cell of our body. That's that experience in darkness is a unifying experience with you and your surroundings and everyone within them.
It's boundary dissolving.
Exactly. But the truth is, there is never any boundary. The boundary is always a fabrication of our own mental construct.
Damn.
So it's actually just an opportunity to experience reality, palpably and metaphorically. And that um, call to action for you to pay attention, because remember, all of this is happening with this heavy dose of Rastafari lyricism as
Yeah.
well.
Well, we haven't even spoken about the MC element
Yeah,
of all of this, which is a whole nother tangent, but that is part of part of it too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's which puts it into this sort of intentional space again.
Yeah.
And let's make no mistake, this is a Pan-African movement.
100%.
It's inside its framework of Rastafari. His Majesty is considered the father of Pan-Africanism, with his works bringing together all of the African heads of state and establishing the Organization of African Unity, making the famous speech where he says, "Until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of a man's eye." But the part that most people don't recite is the very end of the speech, where he says, "And we Africans will fight, and if necessary, and we know we shall win, as we're confident in the victory of good over evil." So it would be totally disingenuous to paint this as anything other than a Pan-African phenomenon.
100%, which is why I touch on it and the inclusivity
Yeah,
piece, because being from outside that culture, but then still being able to be accepted in the experience which you've spoken so eloquently on as an outsider, but being allowed to be still participating, that's a really powerful kind of inclusivity.
yeah. I mean, it's a contentious subject,
Sure.
but regardless of how contentious it is, we can't make no mistake.
Yeah.
Like, maybe not always so, but certainly for the last, 30 odd years, these sound system gatherings, at least here, have been very multicultural, um, and very cross generational, and also cross cultural in, a lot of different of like the city's different kind of subcultural groups, would also, like if we talk about Jashaka, regarded as the king of sound system, it's in London, it's like everyone from the mods to the rockers to the punks to, I mean, to even like anyone that's into music, really, that was seriously into music, had seriously engaging with London's musical scene, would have been hard pushed not to have found themselves in a shaka session, and then more times been hard pushed not to have become a regular attendee.
Mm.
And yet, at no point was it ever not a space where Jashaka himself, who, for those, I think I should make it clear for those who aren't familiar with this, would set up in with his back to the crowd. So it was never performative in nature. It was never a sort of, look at me, I'm here, playing my records, singing my song, and doing my dance.
Mm.
He would have his back turned, and he would face the giant banner of His Imperial Majesty. And in doing so, indirectly instructed everyone else to do the same. And that would often be the only point of focus. There would only be one light bulb. And it would, prior to the invention of the energy saving light bulb, it was a filament light bulb. And that would be plugged into the same plugs as the amplifiers. And these amplifiers draw more electricity to reproduce the baselines that Jashaka would be drawing for than is actually available. So the light flickers rhythmically,
Mm.
which is reminiscent of firelight. And so, even in this massively cross sectional, inclusive space,
Mm.
where unless you violated the order, unless you were rude, unprincipled, uh, dishonorable, and making it impossible for other people to be, free and comfortable in the space, you were welcome.
Mm.
And but yet you were still signaled to give all glory unto His Imperial Majesty.
Yeah, you still have to respect the space you're in and
Yeah,
the culture it came from. You
yeah,
know, you can draw the analogy between, obviously you could just go and practice yoga and just do it in a westernized context, but yoga is from India, from the Indian subcontinent, from the Vedic tradition. That is, and it's the same way, Tai Chi and Qigong is from the Taoist, the Chinese tradition. You have to really understand, don't you, like where the cultures come from. But all the points you raised just, I think, really elevate the sound system. I think people hopefully get the idea. This is more than just a night out. This is more than music. It's a way of life, isn't it? And it's a path analogous to those other paths I've just mentioned.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
path of development.
It requires you to be physically fit.
This is like an ultra marathon, not even going to the toilet. Yeah,
Yeah, it's serious.
yeah,
And it gets reduced to like it gets reduced just to like a cultural sort of like a musical phenomena,
yeah.
like a lifestyle thing. It gets reduced to something more, but I can't find even the sufficiently degrading word. But it, like I said, it requires you to be physically fit. It requires you to be, mentally fit, because you need to pay attention.
Mm.
It requires you to be able to forego the desires of intoxication and of chasing the opposite sex. Um, it requires that you have discipline. You know, if if you start to allow the messages inside of it to permeate inside you, then you're going to find yourself with a profound curiosity for, you know, who Haile Selassie was. Who is this being that is being revered in this space? Why is he being revered? What did he do? That brings you into this beautiful chapter of history, which is contextualizes a lot of where we find ourselves now. It's a crucial part of history. It's actually amazing that they don't teach it in school. It's actually amazing the level that it's been buried to, given its magnitude, even if you have no um, resonance with viewing Haile Selassie as the divine. Even if you have no resonance with that, just from a historical, political perspective, it's
Yeah.
amazing. And just like you say, you can go and do yoga, have a little stretch. Maybe, it goes a bit deeper if you start paying attention to your breath. But if you want the fullness of that, then you're going to have to actually engage, wholeheartedly with the tradition from which it sprung forth. And then you're going to have to, you know, maybe make some dietary changes. Maybe you're going to have to go into long periods of contemplation. Maybe you're going to have to face up to certain things about yourself that you didn't want to face up to. Maybe you're going to have to really even question, what does it even mean to be alive? Like, who am I? What is this place? What am I supposed to do here? And then from there springs the ultimate meaning, because you can't, if you go on any of that journey, you're going to eventually come to that question of, what am I supposed to do? I've got this little slice of life. I'm here. What am I supposed to do with it? And then if you're really blessed, you're going to find the actual point of you being here, and you're going to get to actually manifest it. And to bring it back to the sound system, it's like that potentiality was just existing within a kind of what could appear a night out. Do you know what I mean? It's outreach, it's spiritual
Wow.
outreach on an unprecedented scale, because
Yeah.
the only other people that are on it like that really is the Hare Krishna, as far as I can see. Because you see them men and women at the music festivals. Is it called prashad when they give out the free
I'm
food, or
not.
is that
Yeah.
when they give out the
I used to
leaflets?
get the free curry by LSE.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're
But
not messing around. No.
otherwise, if you want to go, otherwise you got to go temple, church, mosque,
Yeah.
so forth.
Yeah.
And then if you go in any of them places and you've already gone a bit wayward, and you're not going to be able to align with the discipline that's required of you.
Mm.
You're maybe not going to be able to get your Sunday best on, go to church.
Yeah.
If you've been mashed up all night, Saturday out your head and doing God knows what. But when you can go to a session at midnight on a Saturday night and go through all of those disciplines, have that experience of the boundary of self and other dissolve before you, have a transcendental moment, hear a song that meant so much to you when it was released, look up, see this banner of the embodiment of all things good and right being projected with someone gesticulating in this kind of transcendental state to that figure. And then these chants on the microphone that are like mantras and sirens, things being run through delay units. Wah, 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 wah. It's so transcendental. It's like you can't ignore it and you can't not engage with it. If you try to ignore it, well, it's just impossible. It's too loud. It's too dominant. But if you try not to engage with it, it's going to spin you out. It's going to mash up your head because it's so rhythmic. You got to catch the rhythm. You got to catch it. And then there's these sounds and there's these chants and there's this call and response. Person on the microphone, Jah! And then everyone, Rastafari. You can't ignore that. And even for those who have no resonance with Rastafari, more time anyone hears that, all their hairs stand on end.
Yeah.
Because it's so ancient, it's so profound, this call and response. We're all gathered in a circular thing. And yeah, that's why I always say it's the epitome of inclusivity, and it's spiritual outreach. And it's also, if you think about it, in London in the 70s, was even from the 50s onwards, it's a safe haven from the brutality of the outside world. When you got no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, you've got this safe space. That's a shield away from that. It would be interrupted periodically by police raids and whatsoever, but when it was successful, it's a safe place from that. And as the racial landscape of the cities has kind of shifted and sound system has really spread to all four corners of the world, it's maybe not serving that same purpose so poignantly anymore, but it still is a safe place. I know a lot of women where the only place they feel comfortable to go as a single woman is the sound system session. We touched on it earlier, this in the session is again recently that crowd barrier would be used. Traditionally, there would be no crowd barrier. So you even think, if I think of Jashaka, with his back to the people and the record boxes and this, and then there's just a space, he would always be given like at least 6 foot of space, a 6 foot by 6 foot square, and people just gather. And it just, again, another sort of symbolic manifestation of the order and the discipline. Order wasn't maintained with metal barriers to cause disconnect. It was just present. It was embodied morality in everyone in there.
Away from the live aspect of sound system culture, which is obviously the heart and soul of the culture, and you're well known now for your part in that, being a selector, but you're also a sound engineer and someone, or would producer be a fair term?
Yeah, I'm a producer, and I do. So the sound system experience is also underpinned by the phenomena called dub.
Yeah.
I think wrongly becoming a genre, because it's not a genre in my opinion.
What is it?
It's a process.
Okay.
It's a process that was pioneered by the greats like King Tubby's, Lee Perry, scientist, etc. And it's a process whereby you take the constituent parts of the music, the different instruments, the drums, the bass, the guitar, the piano, the horns, the vocal, and have that on a mixing desk. But it doesn't sound so revolutionary now, but just as just as no one had ever thought about touching the records, and when the original DJs that gave birth to hip hop started pulling it back to keep the what was it called? Get down. The
breaks.
The breaks. To keep the breaks.
Cool Herc.
I don't know about the hip hop history, but you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Now we take it for granted that putting your hand on the record is just something you do. But at that point in time, making a chalk mark on the record and pulling it back with your hands was totally revolutionary.
Yeah.
Just as it was to be in the studio and start pushing faders up and down and just like, taking out the drum and bass and pushing up the horns and putting in a big crash of echo and reverb and using that mixing desk as a dynamic instrument was totally revolutionary. The mixing desk was something to capture the sound and mix the sound, and the aim was always to, create a maybe somewhat polished but still a reliable emulation of what had happened in the recording studio.
Okay.
Just suddenly pulling the faders down and taking big chunks of instrumentation out was completely revolutionary. And that, again, created part of the sonic landscape that really made the sound system have this kind of spiritual, transcendental orientation. And so, I'm a producer, but I also work a lot with the phenomena of dub, and I tour live, doing this live on stage, kind of all the tracks from my discography.
Yeah.
And I manipulate it live using the faders and the effects and things.
Okay. And you've spoken about that being an alchemical process.
100%.
What do you mean by that?
I mean,
are you transmuting kind of lower to higher? Are you bringing something forward?
To me, life is an alchemical process.
Sure.
I mean, I'm transmuting thoughts into words at the moment, and that's fueled by some carbohydrate, sugar transformation, and that came from some energy from the sun and
from our baked beans earlier.
I mean, it's all alchemy. Like, I can't. Since I was a kid, I was just fascinated with like the fact that things become things.
Mm-hmm.
It was always just the process that a thing can become another thing. It's just wild to me. And I approach music composition, production, sound engineering, and dub mixing as the same thing. And it's like, I'm also a filmmaker and a designer as well. And all of those disciplines are taking a plethora of raw ingredients and changing it into something new. But because I go by the name Kibir La Amlak, which means glory to Jah or glory to God. Everything I do, whether I like it or not, it's lucky that I love it. But it, when I assumed that name, I sealed my own fate because
Yeah.
I can't. I have to. Everything is in service of the Most High,
Yeah.
and so obviously I'm a flawed human being with my own egotistical desires, and I get to be in the limelight to a certain degree, and that plays havoc with one's head. um so disclaimer, but I if I do my job well, and if I honor the name that I have chosen, or the name that chose me, and it felt more like it chose me because there was a few records where I kept hearing this Kibir La Amlak, Kibir La Amlak, and it was calling me. And so if I do my process well, then I'm taking these raw ingredients and fashioning it into something that is contextually relevant for its consumption, for the purpose of giving all glory on to the Most High. And so everything from sculpting things with the EQ, it's like there's clearly harmonious frequencies and um, discordant frequencies in every sound source, and they've got to be found. And harmony, when you get the harmonization right, whether it's in composition or whether it's in EQ or balance or arrangement, something happens. Something happens. It automatically becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Straight. You feel it. It's almost impossible to put it into words. But when you're looking for a chord, and then and the next chord in the progression, and you can't find it, and you can't find it, and then you find it. It's like the whole point of life just suddenly makes sense in that moment. And it's the same with a mix. And I can't actually, all respect to anyone and how they do their thing,
Yeah.
but I just can't understand relating to it in anything else other than something sacred, because it feels so undeniably sacred. The unification of vibratory phenomena into a newly formed harmonious accord, sometimes from elements that don't seem obviously compatible. It's just it's alchemy. It's alchemy straight. It's sonic alchemy. And the same even with my film work, it's like when you catch the composition right down the lens, and you see the scene just lines up. One little piece of color complements another piece of color, and that shape draws your eye, and it makes you go down there, and you're suddenly telling this whole story just by the way that you've composed a shot.
Mm.
And you know when it's right, and you know when it's wrong. And of course, some of it's cultural, and some of it's down to each person's subjective taste. But they tend to be so much. There's exceptions to it, obviously, but generally speaking, there tends to be so much collective consensus when something is just right. It sounds right,
Yeah.
it looks right, it feels right. And as a creator, trying to get to that place when it aligns, for me, it's just like an explosion, literally, of my namesake. Like, it's that moment. It's like, wow,
I can feel it.
all praises and glory, because it's beyond me.
I can feel the passion. What it comes back to me is the intention, the seriousness to live the path. And on this show, I've had people, speaking to people from all different disciplines, psychotherapists, spiritual practitioners, and I really wanted to showcase the power of this path, of a musical path. And it's been such a privilege to sit down and just hear your passion. And I hope we've really given people something to chew on, some food for thought. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. My
Yeah,
pleasure. I'll give thanks for having me here. And yeah, I hope it is inspiration inspirational for people to hear. And it's if you haven't ever experienced something of that nature, of the sound system in the context of Rastafari, I would strongly urge your listeners to seek it out in their local town and check it out. It's a worldwide phenomenon now.
amazing. Well, we'll leave some information in the show notes with your website, your music, and maybe some of the live events you're doing, so people can check it out. But yeah, it's been an education. I've really felt the passion in the room today, and that's I know when it's a good chat when I just feel that aliveness in the room.
Oh, yeah,
So
man.
it's been a privilege. So thank you very much.
Give thanks for having me here.
Nice one.
All right.